Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting at your kitchen table. Maybe it's after dinner. Maybe you've got a half-cold cup of coffee in front of you, and you open up a retirement calculator online, just out of curiosity. Maybe you saw something on your phone or someone at work mentioned it. You type in your age, you type in what you've saved, and then you type in what you think you'll need to retire comfortably. And the number it gives you back makes your stomach drop a little, because the calculator says you need somewhere around $1 million, and what you have saved right now is not that, not even close maybe. And suddenly you're doing this mental math. How many years do I have left? How much would I need to save every single month? Is it even possible at this point? That feeling, that quiet panic, that low hum of dread that shows up when you think about money and the future at the same time, that feeling is more common than almost anyone talks about out loud. But here's something I want you to hear before we go any further. The idea that most people retire with $1 million saved, that's not reality. That's a myth. And today, we're going to talk about what is real, what the actual numbers look like, why this gap exists, and what it might actually mean for you. So let's start with a number. According to Vanguard's How America Saves report, which pulls data from millions of actual retirement accounts, the median 401k balance for people in their 60s is somewhere around $87,000. Not $870,000, $87,000. And the median is important here, because the median is the middle. It means half of people have more than that and half have less. So you could have someone at $200,000 on one end and someone at $3,000 on the other, and the median still just lands somewhere in the middle of that mess. Now, the average that gets thrown around in financial media looks a lot higher, because when you average everything together, the people who saved a lot pull the number way up, and that creates this illusion that most people are doing fine, when really most people are not in the $1 million club. Not even close. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances estimates that only about 10 to 12% of American households have retirement savings of $1 million or more. That means roughly 88 to 90% of households don't. That's not a small group of unlucky people. That's the majority. That's most of us. And yet somehow the $1 million retirement has become the benchmark, the thing we're all supposed to hit. The number that financial planners, magazine headlines, and retirement calculators keep referencing as though it's the baseline, when really it's closer to the top tier. Now, here's where I want to reframe things a little, because I'm not saying this to make you feel better in a fake way. I'm saying it because the story you've been told about what retirement is supposed to look like was built around a version of American life that, for most people, never fully existed. The whole framework assumes you started saving in your mid-20s with a solid income and no major disruptions, no layoffs, no medical crises, no divorce, no kids who needed things you couldn't say no to, no parents who needed help, no years where you were just surviving. Life doesn't work that way for most people, and pretending it does or measuring yourself against people who happened to have smoother roads isn't wisdom, it's just noise. Let's talk about where this number actually comes from, because it's not random. There's a concept in retirement planning called the 4% rule. It's been around since the 1990s, and the basic idea is this. If you have $1 million saved and you withdraw 4% of it each year to live on, your money should theoretically last through a 30-year retirement without running out, assuming average market returns. 4% of $1 million is $40,000 a year. Add Social Security, which averages somewhere around $18,000 to $22,000 per year for most retirees, you're looking at maybe $60,000 a year to live on. For a lot of people in a lot of places, that's actually a workable number. Not lavish, but workable. So the math makes sense on paper. The problem is that this framework was built during a specific era with specific assumptions about interest rates, market returns, and life expectancy that don't always hold up today the same way they used to. And more importantly, it assumes you actually need that full $40,000 from savings, which isn't always true. Someone who owns their home outright has a very different monthly expense number than someone paying rent in a high-cost city. Someone who retired in rural Tennessee has different needs than someone in Southern California. The $1 million number is a useful benchmark, but it was never meant to be the universal finish line that it became. So if the math isn't universal, why do we all feel so behind when we don't hit that number? Part of it is just how the human brain works around money. We anchor to numbers. Once a number gets associated with success, retirement at $1 million, 6 figures in salary, a certain square footage in a house, it becomes sticky. It feels like the definition of enough, even when the actual definition of enough is completely personal. And there's a second layer here that's worth naming. Most of us grew up in households where money wasn't openly discussed. Maybe your parents didn't talk about what they had or didn't have. Maybe you pieced together their financial situation from context clues, stress around holidays, certain conversations that stopped when you walked in the room, the way the word budget was used like a warning. And then we grew up and we entered a world where money is constantly performed on social media, in the houses people own, in the vacations people take, in the restaurants where colleagues casually suggest splitting a check that quietly made your stomach hurt. So we have this combination. We didn't get a real education in personal finance, we absorbed a lot of anxiety about money from the people around us, and then we got hit with an aspirational benchmark, $1 million, that we started using to measure our self-worth. That's a difficult combination. It's almost designed to make you feel inadequate regardless of what you've actually done. Let me paint a more honest picture of what retirement actually looks like for most Americans, because I think it might surprise you. According to the Social Security Administration, Social Security is the primary source of income for 40% of retirees, not a supplement to their savings, the primary source. That means roughly 2 in 4 people who are currently retired are relying on Social Security as their main financial lifeline. About 57% of retirees say they receive some income from pensions, investments, or savings, but some income covers an enormous range. That includes people drawing $200 a month from an old IRA and people living comfortably off a municipal pension. And part-time work, working in retirement, is more common than people think and more desired than we give people credit for. About 1 in 4 Americans over 65 is still working in some capacity, and studies consistently show that a lot of them actually prefer it, not just for the money, but for structure, identity, social connection, a reason to get up. What this tells me is that retirement isn't one thing. It's not a finish line where you cross over with exactly $1 million, stop working entirely, and live off your portfolio forever. For most people, it's something messier and more human than that. It's a gradual shift, a combination of sources, a recalibration of what you need versus what you thought you needed. And I think understanding that, really understanding it, not just nodding along, changes how you feel about where you are right now.
Here's the thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough, which is the structural reality of why most people don't hit these numbers. Compounding, the thing that makes long-term investing so powerful, works best when you have 2 things: time and consistency. The earlier you start, the less you have to put in to get the same result. The math is striking when you look at it directly. Someone who starts investing $500 a month at age 25 and earns an average 7% return will have roughly $1.3 million by age 65. Someone who starts that same contribution at 35 gets to about $610,000. Same contribution, 10 years of difference, roughly half the outcome. That's the math. But here's the human reality beneath the math. Most people in their 20s are either in debt from student loans, working jobs that pay just enough to survive, or spending their early income on the basics of becoming an adult: first apartments, used cars, medical bills they didn't plan for. The window for early compounding that personal finance books talk about so breathlessly, it doesn't really open for a lot of people until their 30s, sometimes their 40s. And then there are the disruptions. The layoff that came right after you finally got your footing, the health issue that drained your emergency fund, the family situation, a parent, a sibling, a partner that redirected resources you were planning to save. None of these are failures of character. They're just life.
but they have a real mathematical impact on where you land decades later. I want to say this clearly. The savings gap in America is not primarily a discipline problem. It's a structural problem dressed up as a personal one. People are told they're not saving enough, as though the solution is just to care more, when the reality is that wages have stagnated, costs have risen, and the systems that used to support retirement, pensions, social security stability, lower healthcare costs have eroded substantially over the last 40 years. You didn't personally create those conditions, but you do have to navigate them, and that's an important distinction. So here's where I want to offer a shift. Not a motivational speech, just a genuine reframe that I think actually helps. The question, will I have $1 million when I retire, is the wrong question for most people. It's a useful reference point, but it's not the real question. The real question is, what will I actually need, and what does a secure enough life look like for me specifically? Those are different questions, and they lead to very different emotional outcomes. Here's what I mean. Do I have $1 million is a binary. Either you do or you don't. It's a comparison to an external benchmark that wasn't built with your life in mind. And when you fall short of a binary, it just feels like failure. But what do I actually need? That's a question you can answer honestly. You can look at your real expenses, your housing situation, whether you'll have Social Security, whether you have a pension, partial or otherwise, what your health looks like, where you want to live, whether you'd be okay working part-time for a few years into your 60s, not because you have to, but because it keeps you connected and active. When people do this exercise honestly, really honestly, not aspirationally, the number they actually need is almost always lower than $1 million, sometimes significantly lower. A 2021 study from the Employee Benefit Research Institute found a majority of retirees spend less than they expected in retirement, particularly in the early years. The scary future that our brains construct, constant travel, infinite healthcare bills, a lifestyle that requires maximum savings, often doesn't match the actual, quieter, simpler life that many retirees find themselves living, and often preferring. That doesn't mean preparation doesn't matter. It means the goal you're chasing might be shaped by fear more than reality, and fear tends to inflate numbers. Now, and I want to say this gently but directly, none of this means you should stop saving, or that it doesn't matter, or that you should just relax and spend everything. It matters. Every dollar you put away now does real work over time, even if you start at 45 or 50. Even if you only manage a few $100s a month, that's not nothing. In fact, over 15 to 20 years with average returns, a few $100s a month becomes something meaningful. The point isn't that the $1 million goal is unimportant. The point is that your goal, built around your real life, is more useful and more achievable than chasing someone else's benchmark in a panic. Let's get practical, not in a 10 steps to financial freedom way, but in a real life, where do I start kind of way. The first thing, and this may sound boring, but it's genuinely the most important, is to figure out your actual number, not the $1 million number, your number. To do that, you need to look at what you actually spend now and think honestly about what changes in retirement. The mortgage might be gone, the commute costs disappear, the kids' expenses hopefully wind down, but healthcare costs go up. Travel might go up if that's something you want. The number that comes out of that honest exercise is usually more manageable than the fear number your brain defaults to. The second thing is to run your Social Security estimate. A lot of people have never done this, and they have no idea how much they're actually going to receive. You can go to ssa.gov, create an account, and see your projected benefit based on your actual earnings history. For many people, especially people who had middle-class incomes and worked consistently, this number is higher than they expected. It's not a windfall, but it's a real and significant piece of the retirement income picture that often gets ignored in the $1 million conversation. The third thing is to think about the gap, the difference between what you'll need monthly and what Social Security will provide. That gap is what your savings actually need to cover. And when you frame it that way, the savings goal becomes much more specific and much less terrifying than some abstract $1 million mountain. For example, and I'm using round numbers here, not a promise, If you determine you need $4,500 a month to live comfortably and Social Security will give you $1,800, your gap is $2,700 a month. To cover that for 25 years of retirement, accounting for investment returns, you need somewhere in the range of $600,000 to $750,000. Still significant, but not a million. And maybe, depending on your housing situation, your health, your actual lifestyle preferences, it's even less than that. The fourth thing, if you're in your 40s or 50s and feel behind, is to look honestly at your real levers without catastrophizing. Increasing your savings rate even modestly still matters because of the time you have. Delaying retirement for 2 or 3 years has a massive mathematical impact, both because you save longer and because your Social Security benefit grows for every year you delay past 62, up to age 70. Working part-time in your early retirement years is a genuine strategy, not a sign of failure. And downsizing housing to free up equity is something millions of people do successfully. None of these are glamorous, but they're real, and they're far more available to far more people than the advice that essentially just says you should have started earlier and earned more money. That's not advice, that's a lecture. I want to close with something that I hope lands the right way. The reason retirement anxiety is so painful isn't really about money. It's about what money represents: safety, freedom, the ability to not be dependent, the sense that your years of work meant something and left you somewhere secure. And those things are real, they matter. The fear isn't irrational, it's just being pointed at a number, $1 million, that doesn't actually define whether or not you get to have those things. There are people with $2 million saved who feel terrified and spend their retirement paralyzed by what-ifs. There are people with $300,000, a paid-off modest house, and a Social Security check who describe their retirement as genuinely peaceful and full. The number isn't the whole story. The relationship you have with money, the clarity you have about what you actually need, the flexibility you're willing to bring to the shape of your later years, that's most of the story. And the fact that you're here asking these questions, thinking carefully about this, that's not a sign that you're behind. It's a sign that you're paying attention. Most people don't want to think about this stuff at all because it's uncomfortable. You're doing the uncomfortable work. So if you walked away from this video with one thing, let it be this. You don't need a perfect number to make progress. You need an honest number, your number, based on your life. And then you take the next step available to you right now. Not someone else's next step, yours. Progress beats perfection. Always. And almost always, it's enough.